a disabled black woman's quiet night turns violent when a ruthless cop drags her from her van, ignoring her disability and rights. What follows is a brutal fight for justice against a system built to protect the powerful. But the real shock, the truth behind the badge that will leave you speechless. Before we continue this powerful story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another powerful story you won't want to miss. Denise Williams tightened her grip on the steering wheel of her specially adapted van, her fingers tracing the worn leather with a faint tremble, not from pain, but from a nervous energy she couldn't quite shake. The late-night church meeting had left her heart full, but the quiet of the night brought a different kind stillness. It was the stillness that clung to her skin, heavy and expectant, like the calm before a storm. The soft hum of the van's engine was a small comfort as she eased onto Crestwood Avenue, the streetlights flickering intermittently above her. The rain from earlier had left the pavement slick, reflecting the dim amber glow like shattered pieces of glass. Denise's prosthetic legs rested against the van's floor, silent reminders of a life irrevocably changed 6 years ago. The accident that took her legs had rewritten her story in a way she never imagined. Doctors warned her that independence would be a distant dream, but Denise was stubborn in ways that surprised even herself. She had rebuilt her life piece by piece, learning to walk again, not with steel and determination. The prosthetics she wore weren't just tools, they were extensions of her will, hard-earned symbols of resilience. Driving meant freedom. It was more than just getting from one place to another. It was the wind against her face, the rhythm of the road beneath her tires, and the quiet affirmation that she was still whole despite everything. Tonight that freedom felt fragile, wrapped in shadows that seemed to stretch longer and darker than usual. Her thoughts drifted back to the church service, the uplifting hymns, the prayers of hope, the faces of friends who had become family. The sense of community had buoyed her spirit, a temporary shield against the weight she carried every day. She had declined the offer of a ride home with her friends, insisting she was fine. Pride, she knew, was a double-edged sword. As she adjusted the seat and checked the rearview mirror, Denise's gaze softened with quiet resolve. She had survived pain she never wanted to feel, and moments when giving up seemed the easier path. But tonight, driving home alone in the cool night air, she felt that same stubborn spark burning inside her. The street was nearly deserted, the only sounds the soft drip of rainwater from rooftops and the distant hum of a city that never truly slept. Denise's breath came steady and measured, her fingers tightening slightly on the wheel. The faint glow from a lamp in her modest apartment window was still visible in her mind's eye, waiting to welcome her back to safety. But something about the darkness felt different tonight, heavier, as if the night itself held its breath. For the past mile, Denise noticed a pair of headlights following closely behind her. At first, she thought it was just coincidence, a car keeping pace on the empty street. But as the minutes passed, her unease grew. The headlights didn't waver or pass. They stayed too close, too persistent. The red and blue flashing lights suddenly burst to life, casting a kaleidoscope of color that danced violently on the rain-slicked asphalt and splattered across the interior of her van. Her stomach dropped. The sharp wail of sirens cut through the stillness of the night like a knife. Denise's hands clenched the steering wheel a little tighter as she pulled over to the curb, heart pounding with a mixture of confusion and anxiety. She wasn't speeding. Her van was in perfect condition, and her license and insurance were all up to date. There was no reason for this stop, but reasons didn't always matter in moments like these. The cold night air seeped in as she rolled down her window, just enough to hear approaching footsteps, crisp and deliberate against the wet pavement. Her pulse quickened, each beat echoing louder in her ears. Denise tried to steady her breathing, inhaling the cool air through her nose and exhaling slowly. The soft tapping of rain continued on the roof, a rhythmic reminder of how small she felt in the vast, dark world outside. Her mind raced, questioning what this was about. Was it a broken taillight? An expired registration? No, none of those. She had done everything by the book. The unease in her chest blossomed into a knot of dread. As the two officers appeared in her side mirror, their silhouettes looming large, Denise's eyes traced the figures warily. The taller one moved with a rigid posture, his face partially obscured beneath the brim of his hat. His gaze locked onto her with an intensity that felt like a challenge rather than a request. Beside him, a younger officer lingered, less assured, shifting his weight nervously, eyes flickering between Denise and his partner. There was hesitation in his movements, but it was tempered by the unyielding dominance of the first officer. Denise swallowed hard, the dry scrape in her throat almost suffocating. She was no stranger to traffic stops, but something was different this time. The atmosphere crackled with tension. The officer's footsteps grew louder until he reached her window. His voice was clipped, sharp and cold. "License and registration," he demanded, without preamble. Denise nodded, attempting a polite smile, but it faltered under his hard gaze. "Of course, officer," she replied softly, reaching carefully for the glove compartment. Her movements were slow and deliberate, mindful of the phantom aches that sometimes flared unexpectedly in her limbs. Her hand trembled just enough to betray her calm exterior as she pulled out the documents and passed them through the narrow window opening. The officer snatched them roughly from her hand, his fingers barely brushing hers. The suddenness made her flinch. As he scanned the papers, his eyes narrowed, the warmth draining from his face. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered abruptly. Denise blinked, confused and startled. "I can't, officer, I'm disabled. This van is specially modified. I've already handed you my documents." His eyes hardened. "I said, step out of the vehicle." Denise's chest tightened. "I don't understand. What's the issue? I haven't broken any laws." The officer's voice rose, edged with impatience and something darker. "Ma'am, you are obstructing the pedestrian walkway. Step out of the vehicle now." Denise's mind raced. The nearest sidewalk was at least 4 feet away. She knew this was false, an excuse. "Officer, I assure you, I'm not blocking any walkway. I physically can't step out without assistance. If you would just check my permit." "Enough," the officer barked, his tone broking no argument. "You're refusing a lawful order. Get out." The second officer hovered nearby, his expression uncertain, but he said nothing. Denise's fingers trembled against the steering wheel. The air inside the van thickened, stifling. "Please," she whispered, voice cracking. "I'm just trying to get home." The officer's glare remained cold and unyielding. "I told you to step out, now." Denise's voice barely rose. "I'm not resisting, I just can't." The officer's expression twisted with disdain. "If you've got a permit, show it to me." Denise's eyes widened. "I already gave it to you." He barely glanced at the papers, then shoved them back through the window. "Last chance," he growled. "Step out, or I'll remove you myself. And you won't like it." Fear exploded in Denise's chest. Her hands shook violently as tears pricked at her eyes. She swallowed hard, fighting the humiliation swelling inside. "You have rights," she whispered. The officer sneered. "You have the right to comply. You've made your choice." Before she could react, he yanked open the door. His hand gripped her arm like iron. Denise screamed, a sound torn from terror and pain. Denise's voice trembled as she tried once again to explain. "Officer, please understand. I have a disability. I can't step out without assistance. My legs are prosthetic. This van is modified to help me drive." Her words came out in a rush, desperate and pleading. But Officer Hayes's expression hardened. His eyes narrowed with impatience, and his lips pressed into a thin, unyielding line. "I don't want excuses. You're being difficult, resisting a lawful order. Step out now." The coldness in his voice cut through the night air, leaving Denise feeling smaller, more fragile. Her chest tightened. Her hands shook, fingers twitching nervously on the steering wheel. She wanted to comply, more than anything, but the simple truth was that she physically couldn't do what he demanded. Beside Hayes, Officer Carter shifted uneasily. His eyes flickered toward Denise, then away. He opened his mouth, seemed about to say something, but closed it again. The tension between the two officers was palpable. Hayes's dominance oppressive, Carter's silence reluctant, but fearful. Denise felt trapped in a tightening noose. "Please," she whispered, voice cracking. "I'm not resisting. I'm asking for accommodation." Hayes leaned in closer to the window, his breath hot and acrid. "Accommodation or not, you're obstructing the law. I'm giving you one last chance." Her throat was dry. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself against the rising tide of panic. Each word he spoke felt like a hammer blow against her dignity. "I can't step out without help," she repeated. "If you would check my permit, you'd see it's all legal. Please, I just want to go home." Hayes's eyes flicked to the papers in his hand briefly, but his face remained unreadable. "Enough talk, step out, now." Denise's heart pounded as she looked toward the young woman on the sidewalk, phone raised, eyes wide with shock and anger. The crowd was growing, voices murmuring, phones clicking. It felt surreal, as if she were watching her life from a distance. The cold metal of her prosthetic legs pressed against the van's floor. She felt the phantom aches, the long familiar discomfort of limbs that weren't really there. Her breath hitched, and tears pricked at her eyes. Not from pain yet, but from the crushing weight of helplessness. The tension thickened. Hayes's patience had vanished, replaced by a hard, unyielding resolve. Carter took a step back, jaw tight, fingers twitching as if struggling with a silent battle. Denise's voice barely rose. "Please, I'm not the enemy here." Hayes's reply was a sneer. "You're making this harder than it has to be." She could barely speak now, her body trembling. She wasn't difficult, she was disabled, and that simple fact was invisible to the man towering over her, wielding power like a weapon. Without warning, Hayes moved sharply. His hand yanked the van door open with a violent snap that echoed sharply in the quiet street. Denise gasped, caught off guard. Her protests were swallowed in a rush of panic as Hayes's iron grip closed around her arm. She screamed, not just from the sudden pain, but from the shock of losing control, the terror that gripped her chest like a vice. Her prosthetic leg caught awkwardly on the threshold as Hayes began pulling her from the driver's seat. The cold metal disconnected with a sharp clang against the pavement, a sound that reverberated through the night and through Denise's soul. Pain exploded through her arm and side. The force twisted her upper body unnaturally, every movement sending sharp jolts of agony coursing through her. She struggled to catch her breath, sobs breaking free despite her efforts to hold them back. Her cheeks burned, not just from the physical pain, but from a humiliation so deep it threatened to consume her whole. Around her the crowd was growing. Voices whispered and gasped. The soft tapping of phone cameras clicking and whirring filled the air. A young woman stood nearby, voice ringing out in accusation. "The hell is wrong with you? She's disabled. You can't treat her like that." Hayes straightened, chest heaving. His glare swept across the gathering crowd, a twisted mask of rage and disdain. "Back off," he barked. "This is official police business." The young woman laughed bitterly, holding her phone steady. "You're assaulting a disabled woman. This is everyone's business." The crowd swelled, some stepping closer, others holding phones high like shields. Murmurs turned to shouts, the tension rippling like electricity. Carter hovered nearby, his expression torn. His hands twitched at his sides, fingers opening and closing, struggling with the fear that silenced him. "Hayes," Carter began uncertainly, voice low, "maybe we should—" "Shut up, Carter," Hayes snapped without looking back. "I'm handling this." The weight of Hayes's power bore down like a crushing force. Carter's shoulders sagged, silence swallowing his doubt. Denise's body was dragged fully out of the van. One prosthetic leg slipped free, clattering sharply against the wet asphalt. The sound was like a gunshot in the night. Pain lanced through her ribs as she hit the ground, the rough pavement scraping her cheek raw. Her remaining prosthetic twisted awkwardly beneath her. cold and alien. The world shrank to a narrow tunnel of agony and shame. Her sobs were small but relentless. "Stop." Hayes's grip tightened like steel. "You made this harder than it had to be," he spat. "All you had to do was cooperate." Denise couldn't respond. The pain was overwhelming, but it was the crushing humiliation that burned deepest. The night air hung heavy with a thick tension that seemed to press down on every person standing nearby. The flashing red and blue lights from the patrol car cast eerie, shifting shadows on the wet pavement, painting the faces of bystanders with hues of urgency and dread. Phones flickered in the hands of witnesses, their cameras whirring quietly, as they captured every brutal second. The muffled gasps and whispered outrage rippled through the small crowd like an electric current. What was happening here was no longer a private confrontation. It was a public reckoning unfolding in real time. A woman in her 20s, pale-faced but fierce-eyed, stepped forward from the crowd. Her voice cut sharply through the rising noise. "What the hell is wrong with you? She's disabled. You can't treat her like this." Her words struck the night like thunder. Around her, others nodded, murmuring agreement, their own phones raised as weapons of truth. The energy shifted. No longer silent witnesses, the crowd became active participants, demanding justice for a woman stripped bare by cruelty. Officer Hayes's face twisted with rage, the flashing lights reflecting off his flushed skin and making his glare almost feral. "Back off," he barked, voice cracking under the strain of anger. "This is official police business. Mind your own damn business." But the crowd did not retreat. The woman's defiance seemed to galvanize them. More voices rose in protest. "This is abuse," another shouted. "She's not resisting. She's asking for help." The tension thickened, nearly suffocating. Phones recorded relentlessly, documenting Hayes's every move and the cries of a battered woman, struggling to find her breath on the cold pavement. Officer Carter hovered uneasily nearby, caught between loyalty and conscience. His hands twitched, fingers curling and uncurling as if wrestling with silent turmoil. His eyes darted from Hayes to the growing crowd, reflecting a battle raging beneath the surface, a battle between fear of retribution and the gnawing knowledge of wrongdoing. A low murmur of discontent grew among the crowd, swelling like a wave ready to break. The people around Denise were no longer just observers. They were witnesses, unwilling to turn away from what they saw as a blatant injustice. Denise lay sprawled on the wet asphalt, the rough texture scraping painfully against her cheek. Her body was broken, but her spirit was barely crushed. Tears streamed down her face in cold rivulets, mixing with the rain and grime. Each sob shook her frail frame. The metallic glint of her detached prosthetic leg caught the streetlight's glow, a stark, cruel reminder of her vulnerability. Her breath came in shallow, ragged gasps, her vision blurred by tears and exhaustion. Around her, the world became a swirl of angry voices, flashing cameras, and the heavy scent of wet pavement mixed with the acrid smell of police presence. Yet, in the midst of pain and humiliation, a fragile ember of hope flickered inside Denise. The crowd's refusal to let this moment be swept away in silence whispered a quiet promise that she was not alone. The young woman who had stood so defiantly beside her held her phone steady, voice unwavering, despite the fear etched on her face. "I'm recording this. We're not letting you get away with this." The crowd echoed her sentiment, their collective outrage a shield against the cold, callous force that sought to dominate and silence. Officer Hayes's posture stiffened as he glanced nervously around. The calculated cruelty in his eyes flickered momentarily with panic, a crack in the armor he had worn so fiercely. For the first time, Denise saw fear glint there too, raw and undeniable, even if it was quickly masked by stubborn defiance. The chaos swelled louder. Voices grew hoarser as bystanders shouted back at Hayes, their words laced with fury and disbelief. Some moved closer. Others formed a protective circle around Denise, a human barricade born from outrage and compassion. The street had transformed into a battle black, not just of physical power, but of truth and witness. The flashing lights, the raised phones, the relentless cameras, they were the new weapons, piercing the veil of silence that so often protected abuses like this. In the background, Carter remained frozen in place, his face pale and conflicted. The weight of his silence hung heavy in the night air, a reminder that even those closest to the violence struggled under its moral burden. Denise's sobs quieted just slightly, replaced by a growing sense of resolve. She was battered and bruised, yes, but surrounded by witnesses who refused to look away. The nightmare was far from over, but in this moment, amid the escalating chaos, a spark of justice had been lit. Within hours of the brutal assault, the shaky but unmistakably clear video footage captured by bystanders exploded across social media platforms. Phones, originally raised as tools of witnessing, had become weapons of truth. The clip showed everything: Hayes' cold, commanding voice, Denise's trembling protests, the terrifying moment her prosthetic leg clattered to the pavement, and the harsh dragging that followed. The video's reach grew rapidly. Hashtags like "Justice for Denise" and "Stop Police Brutality" trended as millions shared, commented, and reacted. The footage ignited a firestorm of public outrage. People across the country were horrified and fury, not just at the violence itself, but at the blatant dismissal of Denise's disability and humanity. News outlets picked up the story, broadcasting snippets of the video alongside expert commentary on systemic police abuse. Social media feeds flooded with a mix of empathy, anger, and calls for accountability. Some viewers expressed disbelief that such an incident could happen in this day and age. Others shared their own stories of similar encounters, creating a collective outcry against a broken system. Denise sat in her modest living room, the glow of her phone screen reflecting in her weary eyes. The video was playing again, each replay a fresh wave of shock and pain. She felt an ache deep inside, not just from the physical wounds, but from the crushing weight of humiliation made public. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through thousands of comments. Messages of support warmed her heart, a balm against the cold sting of the night's events. Yet, she also faced bitter criticism and blame, accusations that she had been uncooperative, that she had provoked the officers, that she was playing the victim. The conflicting voices in her head mirrored the chaos outside. Shame and fear wrestled with a growing, flickering resolve. She was vulnerable, exposed, and scared, but she also sensed that this moment was bigger than herself. The world was watching now, and silence was no longer an option. Each notification pinged like a call to action. The video was no longer just hers. It belonged to a movement, to countless others who had suffered in silence. And, for the first time since the assault, Denise felt a tentative spark of hope. Amid the growing storm of outrage and confusion swirling in her mind, Denise's phone rang one evening. The name on the screen was unfamiliar: Vanessa Brooks. With a hesitant press, she answered. The voice on the other end was calm and steady, a sharp contrast to the chaos she felt inside. "Hello, Miss William. My name is Vanessa Brooks. I'm an attorney with the Civil Rights Advocacy Center here in Dallas. I saw the video of what happened to you. It was clear to me, and to millions of others, that you were wronged in every way." Denise's breath caught. Hearing those words, spoken with both compassion and unwavering certainty, was like a lifeline thrown across a raging river. For the first time, someone outside her immediate circle acknowledged her pain without doubt or hesitation. Vanessa's voice remained measured, yet carried an urgency that stirred something deep inside Denise. "I want to offer my help, pro bono. You shouldn't have to face this alone. The system often fails people like you, but together, we can fight back." Denise hesitated. Pride warred fiercely with vulnerability. Accepting help meant exposing herself even further, not just to the world, but to the cold, brutal machinery of the justice system she feared. "Why me?" she whispered, voice fragile. "There are so many others suffering. Why take on my case?" Vanessa's reply was firm but gentle. "Because your story matters. Because you have a voice that's been silenced far too long, and because justice demands a fight, I want to stand with you in this. The conversation stretched on for a long time. Vanessa explained what the legal process would entail: the lawsuit, evidence gathering, media exposure, and the inevitable challenges ahead. She spoke of protections for Denise, the community ready to support her, and the growing movement demanding accountability. Denise listened with a heart pounding between hope and dread. The call ended, leaving a quiet space that felt at once empty and full of possibility. She sat in silence, hands clasped tightly. The room around her felt smaller, closer, but also larger, as if the walls had expanded to hold the weight of what she now faced. A turning point had arrived. She could hide, or she could fight. The days that followed Vanessa's call were some of the most difficult Denise had ever faced. The trauma of that night, of being dragged from her van, of pain and humiliation, refused to loosen its grip on her mind. But now, layered over that, was a new storm, the reality of what it would mean to fight back. Fear gnawed at her every moment. Fear of retaliation from the police department. Fear of being judged by strangers who only saw snippets of her story. Fear that the system built to protect would turn its back on her. But beneath the fear, there was another feeling. An ember of courage, faint but growing. Her nights were restless. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her modest apartment, her thoughts racing with questions. What would her family say? Could she withstand the endless scrutiny? Could she relive the horror in a courtroom, forced to face the man who had shattered her peace? The weight of it was almost unbearable. But there were glimmers of light. Her phone buzzed with messages of support from friends and neighbors. Her church community rallied around her, offering prayers and comforting words. Activists reached out through social media and local groups, sharing resources and pledging their support. The support network grew like a warm shield, protecting her from the cold waves of doubt and despair. It reminded Denise that she was not alone, that her story had touched a nerve far beyond her own life. Conversations with Vanessa deepened her understanding of the fight ahead. Vanessa was clear-eyed about the challenges, the long legal battle, the media attention, the department's attempts to discredit her. But she was also unwavering in her belief that Denise's courage could spark change. Slowly, the ember of hope grew brighter. After many hours of soul-searching, Denise finally made her choice. She would fight. When Vanessa arrived at her home that week, Denise greeted her with a mixture of apprehension and determination. Together, they began the painstaking work of preparing the case. They gathered medical records documenting the injuries, collected witness statements from the bystanders who had recorded the assault, and compiled the legal documents necessary to hold the police accountable. Denise met with members of Vanessa's team, a group of dedicated investigators, disability rights advocates, and survivors who had faced similar battles. Their shared commitment and knowledge infused her with a new sense of strength. Each meeting was a step forward, a small victory in the long march toward justice. Denise's resolve hardened with every conversation, every piece of evidence, every expression of solidarity. Though exhaustion tugged at her bones, and the emotional toll was heavy, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: control. She was no longer just a victim, she was a fighter. As news of the lawsuit spread, Denise's world shifted. The privacy she once cherished was replaced by interviews, public appearances, and the glare of cameras. Yet, she stood firm, supported by Vanessa, and bolstered by the swelling chorus of voices standing beside her. The path ahead was uncertain, lined with obstacles and threats, but Denise no longer walked it alone. With her family, her community, and a growing movement rallying behind her, she was ready to face whatever came next. The quiet strength that had carried her through years of pain now propelled her forward with fierce determination. Denise Williams was no longer just surviving. She was fighting for justice, for dignity, and for every person silenced before her. The day Vanessa Brooks filed a civil rights lawsuit against Officer Hayes, and the Dallas Police Department marked the official beginning of Denise Williams' battle for justice. News cameras, reporters, and microphones swarmed the courthouse steps as the case became public. Flashbulbs burst like thunderclaps, capturing every moment of Denise's hesitant appearance. Denise arrived in her adapted van, accompanied by Vanessa and a small group of close friends and family. The weight of the moment settled heavily on her shoulders. Every eye was on her, and though she had rehearsed her words countless times, the reality was overwhelming. Cameras zoomed in, reporters shouted question, and the crowd pressed closer. Her voice trembled slightly when she spoke publicly for the first time, but she held herself with a quiet dignity. She described the night she was assaulted, the fear and pain, the indignity of being dragged from her vehicle. Each word was a small act of courage, in the face of immense vulnerability. Behind the public bravado, however, Denise struggled. The emotional toll of reliving the trauma was immense. At night, the images haunted her dreams. Hayes' cold, hard glare, the vicious pull that ripped her from her van, the metallic clang of her prosthetic leg hitting the pavement. The memories refused to loosen their grip. Worse than the nightmares were the online attacks. Anonymous accounts flooded her social media with hate-filling messages. Some accused her of fabricating the story. Others called her a troublemaker, seeking attention. The racist slurs were relentless and brutal, cutting deep into her already fragile spirit. Despite the darkness, Denise found unexpected strength. Messages of support poured in from all corners. Friends, family, strangers who believed her story and stood by. The growing wave of solidarity was a light against the shadows. Vanessa was a rock throughout it all. Her calm voice and steady presence reminded Denise that this fight was just beginning. "They will try to break you," Vanessa warned, "but we are stronger than their tactics." Those words became a mantra for Denise, anchoring her through moments of doubt and despair. The media frenzy painted Denise's life in a new, relentless light. Interviews, news reports, and social media debates became her new reality. Every day brought fresh challenges, but also new opportunities to tell her story and demand change. As the lawsuit moved forward, Denise realized this was more than a legal battle. It was a fight for dignity, respect, and the right to be seen as human. The courthouse steps, once a place of anxiety, became the stage where she reclaimed her voice. The Dallas Police Department's reaction was swift and strategic. Within hours of the lawsuit filing, official statements emerged, defending Officer Hayes' actions. The department framed the incident as a routine traffic stop that escalated because Denise Williams had allegedly been non-compliant and uncooperative. Their message sought to shift blame away from the officer and on to Denise herself, subtly implying that her disability was being used as an excuse for her behavior. The department insisted Hayes acted within policy and out of concern for officer safety. Public relations spokespeople portrayed Denise as a difficult individual who had resisted lawful orders. Adding fuel to the fire, the police department released selectively edited body camera footage to local news stations. The clip showed moments of Denise speaking loudly and pleading with the officers, but crucial scenes, the violence, the refusal to acknowledge her disability, the aggressive physical removal, were edited out. This distorted presentation aimed to make Denise appear combative, irrational, and responsible for escalating the situation. Television news cycles ran the footage repeatedly. Some commentators sympathized with the police, suggesting Denise overreacted. Social media conversations polarized as the department's narrative took hold, challenging Denise's credibility and casting doubt on her version of events. Vanessa Brooks recognized this pattern immediately. During their numerous conversations, she warned Denise about the smear campaign that was underway. "This is a classic defense tactic," Vanessa explained calmly, but firmly. "They are trying to discredit you to protect their own, to confuse the public, and to intimidate you into silence, but you cannot let them succeed." Denise felt a deep ache of betrayal. The institution sworn to protect citizens was now weaponizing her truth against her. The same system that should have protected her was orchestrating a campaign to undermine her voice and paint her as the problem. Vanessa's resolve never wavered. She laid out a strategy to counter the narrative. They would emphasize transparency, highlight the evidence of abuse, and control the story by telling it boldly and clearly. Vanessa encouraged Denise to reclaim her voice publicly and on her terms, to speak not just about what happened to her, but about the broader injustices faced by disabled individuals and marginalized communities at the hands of law enforcement. Together they coordinated press releases and interviews, aiming to pierce through the department's spin. Vanessa also worked with media contacts to bring expert voices into the conversation: disability rights advocates, legal scholars, and civil rights activists, to frame the incident as part of a larger systemic problem, not an isolated event. Behind the scenes, Vanessa's legal team dug deeper, seeking witnesses, uncovering complaints against Hayes, and gathering proof of departmental cover-ups. They prepared meticulously for every possible attack the defense might mount. Denise absorbed it all: the attacks, the counterattacks, the public scrutiny, with a mix of exhaustion and growing strength. She knew this battle wasn't just legal, it was a war over truth and justice, and she was determined not to be silenced. As Denise embraced the role of a public figure in the fight for justice, an incredible wave of community support rose around her. Activists organized rallies and peaceful protests in Dallas and beyond. People carried signs demanding accountability, chanting Denise's name and calling for an end to police violence, especially against disabled and marginalized people. Social media campaigns flourished. Hashtags like Disabled Emagentares and Disabled Emagenta and Unseen trended, with thousands of people sharing her story and demanding systemic change. Online petitions flooded city halls and police oversight committees, collecting tens of thousands of signatures. Denise attended press conferences alongside Vanessa, where she spoke passionately. Her voice grew steadier and more confident with each appearance. She was no longer just a victim recounting pain. She was a symbol of resistance, dignity, and courage. Yet, despite the public support, the toll at home was intense. The hateful messages didn't stop. Anonymous callers threatened her safety. Social media inboxes filled with racist and cruel attacks. Letters slipped under her door, carried venomous words that pierced her heart. The emotional exhaustion was profound. Some nights, Denise would sit alone, overwhelmed by fatigue and the weight of constant vigilance. The fear was real, not just for the outcome of the case, but for her personal safety and the safety of those she loved. But Denise was buoyed by the kindness and solidarity around her. Friends and family showed up with meals, prayers, and unwavering encouragement. Church members organized vigils, holding candles and lifting her in their prayers. Activists and strangers sent messages of hope, reminding her she was not alone. Vanessa's team provided not only legal expertise, but also emotional support and safety planning. Their presence was a shield against the isolation and fear that could have swallowed her whole. Denise found moments of peace and strength in these acts of love and solidarity. She began to see that her fight was not just for herself, but for a whole community of people who had been ignored, silenced, or mistreated. Her whispered affirmation on weary nights, "I will not be broken," became a mantra of resilience. With each public appearance, each new supporter, each shared story, the movement grew. The battle for justice was no longer Denise's alone. It was a collective roar demanding change. The fight was far from over, but Denise now knew she had the courage, the support, and the resolve to see it through. Vanessa Brooks and her legal team knew that to win Denise's case, they had to expose a pattern, not just a single incident. They dove into investigating Officer Richard Hayes' past, uncovering a disturbing trail of complaints and accusations spanning many years. It quickly became clear Hayes wasn't just a rogue cop who had overstepped his bounds once. He was a man with a long history of abuse and misconduct, carefully shielded by the police department's opaque system. The team sifted through thousands of internal affairs reports, personnel files, and complaint records, These documents revealed dozens of formal complaints against Hayes dating back more than a decade. Many described him as aggressive, quick to anger, and prone to excessive use of force. Several reports spoke of racial profiling Hayes, disproportionately targeting black citizens for stops and arrests. Yet, time and again, these complaints had been dismissed, labeled unsubstantiated, or simply lost in the bureaucratic shuffle. Vanessa and her investigators reached out to former officers and insiders. Many were reluctant to talk openly, fearing retaliation or damage to their careers. Some expressed frustration with a department culture that prioritized loyalty and silence over accountability and justice. But with patience and persistence, a few brave individuals stepped forward, providing critical testimonies and secret evidence. One such person was Aaron Whitaker, a former police officer who carried the burden of a secret for years. Aaron explained he had been assigned to patrol with Hayes several years earlier when they were involved in a violent traffic stop with a black teenager. Aaron had recorded the entire incident on his body camera, knowing it showed Hayes using unnecessary and brutal force. Fearing retaliation, he had hidden the footage. Aaron's testimony and the hidden footage became a turning point. The video revealed Hayes's viciousness in stark detail, contradicting the department's official story. It showed Hayes dragging the teenager out of the car, using excessive force as the boy struggled, and ignoring pleas from bystanders. The department had destroyed the official footage, but Aaron had preserved a copy. Vanessa realized that this evidence was far more than a single piece. It was proof of a systemic cover-up. The department's pattern of protecting abusive officers was now on full display. For Denise, this revelation brought a mix of anger, pain, and a fierce determination to see justice done. With this powerful information, Vanessa prepared to expose the entire corrupt system in court, determined to bring accountability not only to Hayes, but to those who enabled his behavior. Rachel Pierce was more than just the young woman who had captured Denise's assault on camera. As a documentary filmmaker driven by a deep passion for justice, Rachel saw her role evolve from a bystander to an active investigator and truth teller. The viral video was only the beginning. She was determined to uncover the full extent of Officer Hayes' misconduct and expose the system that had enabled it. Her research led her down a darker path, digging through public records, interviewing community members, and connecting with local activists. Rachel uncovered the existence of another violent incident involving Hayes' traffic stop 5 years prior with a black teenager that had ended in excessive force and trauma. The incident had been quietly bankrupted by the police department, official reports heavily redacted or missing altogether, and witnesses silenced through intimidation and fear. Undeterred, Rachel tracked down a former officer who had been present that night. This man had secretly recorded the entire encounter on his body camera, fully aware that the department would destroy the footage to protect their own. Fear had kept him silent for years, but Rachel's persistence and assurance gave him the courage to come forward. The footage was raw and unfiltered. It showed Hayes barking orders with venom, dragging the teenager from the vehicle, and unleashing a barrage of blows as the young man struggled beneath his grip. The camera captured the horror denied by official narratives, a vivid testament to Hayes' pattern of violence. Rachel meticulously crafted a documentary, combining this footage with interviews from witnesses, legal experts, disability advocates, and civil rights activists. The film painted a damning portrait, not just of Hayes, but of a system rife with corruption, cover-ups, and institutional failure to protect the vulnerable. The documentary rapidly gained attention, shared widely across social media, featured on independent news outlets, and discussed in activist circles. It amplified public outrage and deepened scrutiny on the Dallas Police Department. Painful to relive, but empowering to see the truth unfold for all to witness. The collaboration between Vanessa's legal team and Rachel's journalism forged a powerful alliance. Together, legal strategy and public awareness strengthened Denise's case, highlighting the systemic nature of the problem. Rachel's documentary was more than evidence. It was a beacon calling for accountability and reform. For Denise, watching the documentary stirred a complex mix of emotions. The footage confirmed what she had feared, that she was not alone in her suffering, and that Hayes' abuse had left many scars. Yet it also fueled her determination. She was fighting not just for herself, but for every silenced victim. The truth was breaking free, and the courtroom was the next battlefield. With the mounting evidence and growing public support, the next phase demanded intense preparation. Vanessa Brooks knew that the trial would be grueling, a battle to stand firm against attempts to discredit Denise, and to lay bare the truth in a court of law. Vanessa took the lead in coaching Denise for the courtroom. They spent countless hours rehearsing, going over questions, and practicing how to answer with clarity and composure. Vanessa prepared Denise for the inevitable aggressive cross-examination, designed to shake her confidence, question her credibility, and paint her as difficult or unreliable. Despite growing strength, Denise was human. The thought of reliving the assault in front of a judge, lawyers, and a jury was terrifying. Memories of pain, humiliation, and fear hovered close, threatening to overwhelm her resolve. There were nights filled with restless sleep, doubts creeping in, and moments of quiet vulnerability. Yet Vanessa's voice was a steady anchor. "You know your truth, speak it clearly and calmly. You are not alone. We will face this together." Those words became a mantra, a source of courage on the darkest days. Between legal sessions, Denise spent time reflecting. This was no longer simply a fight for personal justice. It was a mission to restore dignity and demand accountability for all who suffered under similar abuses. The courtroom was not just a place of judgment, but a stage for truth. She drew strength from the community that had rallied around her: activists, friends, family, and countless others who shared their own stories of pain and resilience. Their voices in solidarity reminded Denise that her struggle was part of a larger movement for change. Meanwhile, Vanessa's team worked tirelessly behind the scenes. Investigators tracked down additional witnesses, gathered medical records, and assembled a robust collection of evidence. Legal experts analyzed policies and practices to expose systemic failures within the police department. Each piece of evidence was a weapon against the department's defenses, meticulously prepared to dismantle their narrative and hold Hayes accountable. The pressure on the defense grew as cracks appeared in their carefully constructed story. As the trial approached, Denise's confidence solidified. The fear remained, but it no longer ruled her. Instead, it was tempered by determination, a fierce resolve to stand tall and make her voice heard. On the eve of the trial, Denise sat quietly in her apartment, hands folded, heart pounding but steady. The journey had been long and painful, but now she was ready. The truth was on her side, and she would no longer be silenced. The morning of the trial dawned cold and gray, the heavy clouds hanging low over the city. Denise Williams sat quietly in the passenger seat of Vanessa Brooks's car, gripping the armrest of her wheelchair with nervous energy. Beside her, Rachel Pierce adjusted her camera bag, her presence a comforting reminder of the shared mission they carried. The silence in the car was thick, each lost in their own thoughts about the battle ahead. As the van pulled up to the imposing courthouse, reporters and photographers swarmed the entrance. The flashing cameras shattered the morning calm like thunderclaps. Microphones were thrust forward, voices clamoring, reporters shouting questions in rapid succession. The bright glare of the media spotlight felt both invasive and necessary. It was a public stage now, and Denise was at the center. Despite the chaos, Vanessa kept her steady hand on Denise's shoulder, whispering words of encouragement. "Stay focused," she said softly. "You're not alone. We're here, every step." Pushing Denise's wheelchair through the revolving doors, the team entered the vast marble lobby. The polished floors reflected the ornate chandeliers and the echo of footsteps. The courthouse was a cathedral of law and judgment, its high ceilings and towering columns a constant reminder of the gravity within. As they made their way to the courtroom, Denise felt the eyes of every stranger resting on her. Some faces held sympathy, others skepticism. The murmurs of the crowd blended with the low hum of cameras and whispered conversations. The air was thick with anticipation and tension, Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere shifted. The room was cavernous, lined with dark wooden panels that seemed to absorb sound and amplify the weight of silence. Rows of benches were already filled with journalists, legal staff, and members of the public. The jury sat attentively, their faces a mix of curiosity, concern, and seriousness. The judge's bench rose high at the front, imposing and authoritative. The emblem of justice adorned the wall behind, a solemn reminder of the role the court played in determining truth and fairness. Denise's wheelchair made a soft creaking sound as Vanessa maneuvered her down the aisle. The sound seemed to fill the room, marking her presence boldly. She noticed the press gallery perched high above, cameras trained on every movement. Every detail heightened Denise's nerves. The rustle of papers, the quiet tapping of keyboards, the measured footsteps of the bailiffs. She felt the full weight of the moment. This was where her life would be dissected, where her truth would be challenged. Yet amidst the intensity, Denise found an unexpected sense of calm. She was here not just for herself, but for everyone who had been ignored or abused. The crowd outside was not just spectators. They were witnesses to a fight for justice. Vanessa gave her a final squeeze on the shoulder. "You're ready," she said firmly. Denise nodded, swallowing hard. The doors to the courtroom closed behind them, and the trial began. The courtroom hushed as Denise was sworn in, the oath a solemn promise to tell the truth. The clerk's voice was clear and formal. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do," Denise replied, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. Taking a deep breath, she began recounting the night that had changed everything. Her voice painted the scene vividly: the late hour, the wet streets, the sudden flash of police lights in her rearview mirror. She described her pride in independence, the careful adaptations that allowed her to drive despite her disability. She spoke of the growing fear as the officers approached, her attempts to explain her physical limitations, and the cold dismissal she faced. Her words captured the confusion and terror as Officer Hayes demanded she step out of the van, ignoring her protests and needs. Denise's recounting was raw, her emotions flowing beneath the surface. She described the moment of violent force, the wrenching pull that dragged her from the vehicle, and the metallic clang of her prosthetic leg falling to the pavement. Throughout, her voice held a balance of vulnerability and strength. Tears glistened in her eyes but did not fall. The courtroom listened, rapt and silent. Then came the defense attorney's cross-examination. His tone shifted sharply, becoming confrontational and pointed. He questioned every detail, probing for inconsistencies, painting Denise as uncooperative and argumentative. "Isn't it true you refuse to obey a lawful order?" he asked bluntly. Denise's pulse quickened. She recalled Vanessa's coaching: "Stay calm, speak clearly, do not be provoked." "I did not refuse," she answered firmly. "I explained my disability and my inability to comply physically." The attorney pressed, trying to twist her words. He suggested her fear might have been exaggerated, her actions intentional. But Denise met each question with honesty and clarity. She described her pain, her helplessness, and her desperation to be heard. Vanessa watched closely, her eyes shining with pride. She whispered reminders when Denise faltered and offered a reassuring smile. The strength Denise displayed was a testament to the months of preparation. Some jurors nodded subtly, their faces reflecting empathy. Others remained impassive, absorbing every word. Denise's testimony was a turning point, her voice a beacon cutting through layers of doubt and denial. The courtroom atmosphere shifted palpably when Aaron Whitaker took the stand. His entrance was quiet but commanding. He was a man weathered by years of regret and burden, carrying the weight of secrets that had long festered in silence. Aaron began by describing his early days on the force and his uneasy partnership with Officer Hayes. His voice was low but steady, as he painted a picture of a man known for quick tempers and a penchant for brutality. He spoke candidly about the department's culture, a culture that rewarded loyalty over justice and punished those who spoke out. He revealed the pressure he faced to remain silent despite witnessing abuses. Then, Aaron presented the evidence that had remained hidden for years. Grainy but undeniable body cam footage of Hayes violently confronting a black teenager during a traffic stop 5 years before Denise's ordeal. The video showed Hayes barking orders, dragging the boy from the car, and administering force far beyond what was necessary or justified. As the footage played on the courtroom screens, a hush fell over the audience. Jurors leaned forward, their faces pale with shock. The raw brutality was undeniable, the department's narrative crumbling before their eyes. Even the defense attorneys seemed unsettled, exchanging tense glances as the truth spilled out. Hayes, sitting rigidly at the defense table, showed subtle signs of crack. Aaron's testimony was a reckoning. He spoke of his fear of retaliation, the guilt of silence, and his decision to come forward in the hope that justice might finally prevail. For Denise, hearing Aaron speak was both painful and empowering. It confirmed that she was not an isolated victim, but part of a pattern of abuse that had been hidden for too long. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, the weight of the truth settling heavily on everyone present. The fight for justice was no longer just Denise's. It was a challenge to an entire system. The Dallas Police Department's response to the mounting evidence and growing public attention was swift and strategic. Behind the polished facade of official statements and press releases, the department was mobilizing its full arsenal to protect one of its own. Lawyers scrambled to file a barrage of legal motions aimed at delaying the trial and complicating Denise's path to justice. Each motion was a calculated move designed to exhaust resources, wear down resolve, and buy time for the department to control the narrative. The legal team representing the police pressed hard, challenging the admissibility of evidence, questioning witness credibility, and attempting to narrow the scope of the trial. Public relations operatives crafted messaging that subtly shifted blame onto Denise. Through carefully worded press releases, they portrayed her as a combative individual who had escalated the incident with Officer Hayes. The department insisted Hayes had acted within the boundaries of his duties, framing the encounter as a retail nostalgic stop, complicated by non-compliance. Media outlets hungry for controversy amplified these narratives. Headlines suggested that Denise's version of events was exaggerated or politically motivated. Some commentators questioned her motives, implying she was seeking attention or financial gain. Social media accounts linked to supporters of the police department circulated edited clips from body cameras that conveniently left out the most damning moments. Vanessa Brooks understood this was a classic strategy, an attempt to discredit the victim to shield the abuser. She meticulously prepared counter-arguments and gathered additional proof of Hayes's misconduct and the department's cover-up culture. Legal filings were made exposing internal complaints, ignored reports, and the destruction of crucial evidence. Vanessa also encouraged Denise to remain publicly visible, to speak out boldly, despite the mounting pressure. They coordinated with civil rights groups and journalists to keep the story alive in the public eye, countering the department's misinformation with facts, testimonies, and personal stories. For Denise, the department's pushback felt like a personal attack, an effort to erase her dignity and silence her voice. Yet, rather than breaking her, it ignited a fiercer determination. Every attempt to undermine her only fueled her commitment to expose the truth and seek justice. As the legal fight intensified, the ripples of Denise's story spread far beyond the courtroom, igniting a powerful wave of community solidarity. Her struggle resonated deeply with countless people who had either faced police brutality themselves or had witnessed the persistent injustices inflicted on marginalized groups. What began as a personal battle blossomed into a collective movement calling for accountability and systemic reform. The streets of Dallas soon filled with supporters carrying signs emblazoned with messages like "Justice for Denise," "Protect the Vulnerable," and "End Police Brutality." These rallies were vibrant and diverse. people of all ages, races, and backgrounds gathering in shared purpose. Their chants echoed through city squares and parks, demanding transparency and a policing system grounded in respect and dignity. Vigils held in churches and community centers became sanctuaries for healing. People lit candles in memory of victims whose voices had been silenced, and prayed for a future where such violence would no longer be tolerated. These gatherings offered more than comfort. They forged bonds of unity and steely resolve to push for change. The power of social media became undeniable. Hashtags like "Stand with Denise" and "Justice Tavor" trended across platforms, connecting individuals nationwide. Videos and heartfelt testimonials flooded timelines, offering a digital chorus of voices demanding reform. Survivors shared their stories, families recounted their pain, and activists posted calls to action, all reinforcing the notion that Denise's case was part of a far-reaching ravine. Community organizations mobilized quickly to provide resources, legal support, and mental health services for those affected by police violence. Local churches hosted discussions on disability rights, racial justice, and police accountability, helping educate and inspire activists and citizens alike. Schools and universities organized forums, sparking dialogue about systemic racism and the urgent need for reform in law enforcement practices. Denise herself became a symbol of courage and resilience. Meetings with activists and supporters were often emotionally charged. Tears were shed as stories of pain and survival were shared, and hugs were exchanged in silent solidarity. Each encounter strengthened Denise's conviction that her fight was not isolated, she was fighting alongside a community bound by shared pain and hope. This growing solidarity created a protective shield around Denise. It offered her emotional sustenance, reminding her that her voice had power and that she was not alone. The knowledge that so many stood beside her, ready to speak out, rally, and demand justice became an unshakable source of strength amid the storm. Yet the movement was about more than just Denise. It was a collective reckoning, a demand that society confront the systemic flaws allowing abuses to persist. The community's call for change echoed beyond the courtroom walls, challenging the very structures that had long ignored or suppressed voices like hers. Despite the swelling tide of public support and solidarity, the personal cost to Denise was immense. The glare of relentless media attention was accompanied by a growing shadow of harassment and threats. Anonymous messages arrived daily, some filled with hateful racist slurs, others with menacing warnings that chilled her to the bone. Her phone buzzed constantly, but more often than not, emotionally, Denise found herself stretched to the breaking point. The mental exhaustion was relentless, as if the weight of the fight bore down on her very soul. The stress manifested physically. Her chest tightened, sleep became elusive, and nightmares replayed moments of her assault with brutal clarity. Some nights she lay awake for hours, her mind racing with fears of retaliation or failure. Within the walls of her home, surrounded by family and close friends, Denise found her only refuge. These intimate moments were the times she allowed herself to be vulnerable. Conversations with her daughter Monica became lifelines of emotional support. Monica's presence was steady and reassuring, her quiet strength a balm against the storm outside. They spoke often, sharing tears and frustrations, but also hope and determination. Friends stepped in to fill gaps, offering practical help, meals delivered to the doorstep, errands run, and simple companionship. The small acts of kindness, whether a phone call or a warm meal, became lifelines that helped Denise carry the burden. She cherished these gestures deeply, knowing that even amidst the chaos, human connection was vital. Faith played an essential role in sustaining Denise. Her spiritual community embraced her, offering prayers, encouragement, and a sense of peace. She often found solace in quiet moments of prayer or meditation, drawing on teachings of perseverance, strength, and hope. These moments reminded her that she was more than her trauma, that resilience was possible even in the darkest times. Despite the fear and fatigue, Denise's purpose remained clear. The battle for justice was no longer just a legal fight. It was a mission to reclaim dignity for herself and for all who had been silenced. The personal toll was high, but it fueled her determination. Every hateful message, every sleepless night, every pang of doubt was met with renewed resolve. She often whispered to herself in quiet moments, "I am stronger than their hate. I am more than my fear." These words became her mantra, a steady beacon guiding her forward when the path seemed uncertain. The journey was far from over. The emotional wounds were deep, and the obstacles ahead formidable. Yet Denise faced the future with courage rooted in love, for her family, for her community, and for the ideal of justice that had become her guiding light. The courtroom quieted as Officer Richard Hayes was called to the stand. He rose, adjusting his neatly pressed uniform with practiced ease. His face was composed, eyes sharp, projecting the image of a professional officer dedicated to duty and safety. He spoke clearly, measured, careful to maintain a tone of calm authority. "I was performing my duties as an officer," Hayes began, his voice steady but firm. "On the night in question, I responded to a vehicle that was obstructing the pedestrian walkway. I followed standard procedure, issuing lawful orders to the driver to exit the vehicle." He paused briefly, glancing toward the jury as if to reinforce the legitimacy of his actions. "My primary concern was officer safety. The driver's refusal to comply raised red flags, and I acted accordingly to ensure the situation did not escalate." Yet, beneath the composed exterior, subtle signs betrayed Hayes's calm. His hands twitched slightly on the witness stand. His jaw tightened as he answered pointed questions. Occasionally, his eyes darted toward Vanessa Brooks, the lead attorney, whose presence seemed to unsettle him more than he admitted. Hayes recounted the encounter with a clinical detachment, emphasizing his obligation to enforce the law. He insisted his actions were justified, necessary responses to perceived resistance. His narrative carefully avoided mention of Denise's disability, instead focusing on the supply's non-compliance and obstruction. As Hayes described the events, he maintained a controlled demeanor, but those watching closely noticed tension lurking beneath. His posture stiffened when recounting the moments Denise refused to step out, and his voice sharpened when asked about the use of force. Throughout his testimony, Hayes framed himself as a victim of circumstance, an officer doing his job amid confusion and hostility. He portrayed Denise as uncooperative and argumentative, casting doubt on her motives and behavior. Yet even as he spoke, the courtroom atmosphere shifted subtly. Some jurors exchanged uncertain glances, their expressions revealing the seeds of doubt. The polished facade of confidence showed faint cracks under the intense scrutiny. Denise watched from the sidelines, her heart pounding. The man who had inflicted so much pain sat just feet away, cloaked in an air of authority and control. But behind that veneer, she sensed the vulnerability Vanessa had prepared her to expose. Vanessa Brooks rose with quiet determination. Her voice, calm yet piercing, cut through the courtroom like a sharpened blade. She began her cross-examination by addressing Hayes with precision and clarity, dismantling his narrative piece by piece. "Officer Hayes," Vanessa began, "you testified that you were following protocol. Can you please explain what steps you took to accommodate Ms. Williams's disability during the encounter?" Hayes shifted uncomfortably. "I was focused on safety and compliance. The driver refused to exit, obstructing the walkway." Vanessa's gaze didn't waver. Melinda Wiz made a move to bow her work, but she was disabled, and physically unable to step out without assistance. "Did you take any action to verify her claim or offer reasonable accommodation?" A flicker of irritation crossed Hayes's face. "I assessed the situation as best I could. I could not allow non-compliance to jeopardize safety." Vanessa leaned forward. "So you admit that you ignored clear communication about her disability in favor of your own judgment?" The courtroom hung on Hayes's hesitation. Vanessa pressed further, exposing contradictions in his account. She presented testimony and evidence that Hayes failed to check Ms. Williams' permits, disregarded standard procedures for interacting with disabled individuals, and used excessive force rather than de-escalate. Her questions highlighted a disturbing pattern of abuse of power, not just an isolated incident. She wove together facts with legal precision, illustrating how Hayes' actions violated policies, laws, and basic human dignity. As the questioning intensified, Hayes' frustration grew palpable. His voice rose defensively, attempts at deflection growing more frequent. Vanessa remained steady, unyielding in her pursuit of truth. "Officer Hayes," she said, "were you aware that Ms. Williams' prosthetic leg was damaged during the incident? And do you consider that a necessary consequence of enforcing your orders?" The courtroom was silent, except for Hayes' strained silence. His inability to justify the harm inflicted was a blow to his credibility. Vanessa's relentless interrogation revealed the gap between Hayes' claims and the reality documented by video evidence and witness testimony. The defense's carefully crafted story unraveled under the weight of facts and moral clarity. The courtroom was thick with tension as Vanessa Brooks continued to dismantle Officer Hayes' testimony. Every juror in the room was acutely aware of the gravity of the moment. Their faces, once neutral and unreadable, now revealed flickers of uncertainty, disbelief, and growing empathy for Denise Williams. Some jurors exchanged subtle glances, brows furrowed, silently communicating their internal struggle to reconcile Hayes' words with the mounting evidence against him. Denise sat quietly in her wheelchair, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest like a physical burden. Her heart hammered loudly in her ears, a mix of anxiety and fragile hope intertwining with every passing second. She glanced toward Vanessa, who sat a few feet away, her expression calm but resolute, a steady anchor in the emotional storm. Throughout the cross-examination, Vanessa's questions had peeled back the carefully constructed facade Hayes had built. She revealed the gaps, contradictions, and moral failings hidden beneath his composed exterior. Jurors were witnessing the slow unraveling of a man who had long cloaked his actions in authority and control, only to be exposed for the violence and disregard he had inflicted on a vulnerable woman. The defense attorneys tried to interject, their objections sharp and frequent, attempting to disrupt Vanessa's momentum. But each interruption only underscored the strength of her case and the mounting pressure on Hayes' defense. The courtroom felt like a battle horn where truth and deception collided, and truth was steadily gaining ground. Hayes himself was visibly affected. The confident officer who had taken the stand earlier now sat rigid, his jaw clenched tightly, and his eyes darting nervously between the jury and Vanessa. The controlled calm he had tried so hard to maintain was fracturing under the weight of the truth. His answers grew shorter, more defensive, and at times noticeably strained, the subtle twitch in his hands, the tightening around his mouth. Denise's eyes scanned the jury box. She caught glimpses of jurors leaning forward, their attention unwavering. A few clasped their hands tightly together, a sign of their deep contemplation. Others exchanged quick, whispered looks, perhaps silently acknowledging the seriousness of the evidence they were absorbing. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath as the video footage of Hayes' prior violent encounter was referenced once more. The jurors' faces showed unmistakable shock and horror. This was no longer just about Denise's case. It was about a pattern of abuse and a systemic failure to hold those in power accountable. Outside the courtroom, reporters and spectators buzzed with anticipation. Social media feeds flooded with commentary, expressing outrage, support, and solidarity with Denise. The public's eyes were fixed on the unfolding drama, watching as the scales of justice teetered under the weight of undeniable evidence. Inside, the judge called for a brief recess, a pause that allowed everyone a moment to gather themselves. Vanessa leaned toward Denise and whispered words of encouragement. Denise nodded, drawing strength from Vanessa's unwavering support. The brief interlude felt like a small victory, a sign that their truth was piercing through the defenses. Denise's thoughts raced as she sat quietly, replaying the testimony in her mind. The fear and humiliation she had endured were now public, laid bare for all to see. Yet beneath that fear, a growing sense of empowerment took root. She was no longer alone. The jury was listening. The truth was finally being heard. As the courtroom emptied slightly for the recess, Denise's gaze drifted back to the defense table. Hayes sat with his head lowered, shoulders slumped, the confident posture replaced by a defeated stillness. It was a stark contrast to the man who had wielded power over her with callous disregard just months before. The moment was heavy with significance. The battle had been long and exhausting, but now the tide seemed to be turning. The jury, tasked with deciding Denise's fate, was visibly grappling with the reality before them. The mask of authority worn by Hayes was slipping, revealing the human cost of unchecked power and systemic neglect. Denise's heart was a tumult of emotion, fear of the unknown verdict, relief at the progress made, and cautious hope that justice might finally prevail. The fight was far from over, but this moment, charged with tension and possibility, was a critical step on her journey toward healing and accountability. The courtroom emptied slowly, the heavy wooden doors closing behind the last juror as the deliberation began. Denise sat quietly in her wheelchair, her fingers intertwined tightly in her lap. The air felt thick with tension, each heartbeat a thunderous drum in her ears. The months of trauma, the endless courtroom battles, the public scrutiny, it all funneled into this moment of agonizing waiting. Her eyes darted nervously around the room, taking in the faces of her closest supporters. Vanessa Brooks sat beside her, calm and composed, radiating steady strength. Vanessa's hand rested lightly on Denise's arm, a simple touch that tethered her to hope. "Whatever happens," Vanessa whispered gently, "you've already won by speaking your truth. This moment can't take that away from you." Denise nodded, but the tight knot of anxiety in her stomach refused to loosen. The waiting was the hardest part, the limbo between the trial's end and the promise of justice. Time slowed to a crawl as she thought back to every painful detail. The night Hayes had assaulted her, the cold steel grip that pulled her from her van, the shame and fear she'd carried ever since. Outside the courthouse, a media frenzy buzzed relentlessly. Reporters set up cameras and microphones, their whispers carrying anticipation and speculation. Social media feeds exploded with reactions, supporters rallying and critics questioning. The entire city seemed to hold its breath, watching this fragile moment of reckoning unfold. Back inside, the jurors sat behind closed doors, tasked with a monumental responsibility. They had to sift through conflicting testimonies, weigh evidence, and decide the fate of a man who had wielded his badge as a weapon. The gravity of their task pressed down like a suffocating weight. Denise's mind wandered to the jurors. Who were they? What did they think? Were they moved by her story, or swayed by the defense's attempts to paint her as difficult? She closed her eyes briefly, seeking strength in the quiet moments, drawing on the countless people who had supported her from afar. Minutes stretched into hours. The courtroom staff whispered quietly. Reporters paced, and Denise's breath hitched with every creak of the door. Finally, the door opened, and the jury re-entered, their faces solemn and unreadable. The moment of truth had arrived. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence, as the jury foreman slowly rose from his seat. Every eye was locked on him, every breath held in collective anticipation. The weight of months of struggle, pain, and perseverance was about to culminate in this moment. His hands trembled only slightly as he unfolded the verdict sheet, the paper creaking softly like the fragile hope hanging in the air. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Officer Richard Hayes, guilty on all counts," the foreman's voice rang out, steady and deliberate. "Guilty of excessive use of force, violation of civil rights, and unlawful detainment." A ripple of shock and disbelief moved through the courtroom. Denise's chest tightened as a tidal wave of emotions flooded over her. Relief, vindication, exhaustion, and an overwhelming surge of validation. Her eyes brimmed with tears that blurred the faces around her, but she held herself together, breathing deeply as if drawing strength from the very air. Vanessa Brooks gently squeezed Denise's hand, her eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and satisfaction. "You did it," she whispered softly. "You spoke your truth, and they listened." The judge's voice then commanded the room's attention. Hayes's conviction was no mere symbolic victory. The court ordered his immediate termination from the police department. His badge and pension were to be revoked without delay. Further, the judge recommended that criminal charges be pursued against him by the district attorney's office. A stark statement that this abuse of authority would face full legal reckoning. Outside the courtroom, a chorus of cheers erupted among supporters. Cameras flashed as Denise and Vanessa emerged into the public eye, faces radiant with the glow of justice served. Reporters clamored to capture their statements, eager to broadcast the historic victory far and wide. For Denise, the verdict transcended personal vindication. It was a beacon of hope for countless others whose voices had been silenced by fear or injustice. The months of reliving trauma, the nights consumed by anxiety, the relentless fight all culminated in a moment that promised systemic change. Yet beneath the victory lay a sober truth. The verdict was a critical milestone, but not the end. Hayes's conviction was one battle in a far larger war against entrenched systems of power and protectionism. The fight to dismantle institutional cruelty and build accountability was just beginning. Denise looked toward Vanessa and nodded with quiet determination. The journey ahead would be long and fraught, but this moment fortified her resolve. She had pierced the veil of silence and injustice, and now others could follow. The crowd outside roared, their voices united in demands for reform and dignity. The verdict was a spark, igniting the hope for a future where justice was not a privilege, but a right accessible to all, regardless of status or circumstance. The verdict unleashed a cascade of consequences that rippled far beyond Officer Hayes himself. The Dallas Police Department found itself under an unrelenting spotlight. For years, the system had allowed misconduct to fester beneath layers of bureaucracy and silence, but now, the public demanded accountability at every level. Internal Affairs launched exhaustive investigations into the department's leadership and policies. The scope was broad, examining not only Hayes's actions but the organizational culture that had enabled him to act with impunity. Past complaints were revisited, revealing a pattern of dismissals, cover-ups, and a troubling tolerance for abuse. Department officials held press conferences, their faces solemn yet rehearsed. They pledged sweeping reforms, commitments to overhaul training protocols, implement stricter oversight mechanisms, and foster transparency with the community. They promised to root out corruption and rebuild the trust so deeply fractured by years of neglect. However, behind closed doors, the atmosphere was fraught with tension. Many officers grappled with the fallout. Some expressed remorse and a desire to change, while others clung to defensiveness or denial. The case had shattered the illusion of invincibility that many within law enforcement had long taken for granted. The media's coverage was relentless. News outlets framed the verdict as a watershed moment, shining a light on systemic failures far beyond a single officer. Editorials called for nationwide reforms, while civil rights groups praised Denise's courage and the power of her testimony. Yet they cautioned that this victory was only a beginning, not an endpoint. For Denise, the unfolding investigation was a mixture of affirmation and sobering realization. It confirmed the truth she had fought so hard to expose, that Hayes was not an aberration, but part of a deeply flawed system. The department's leadership had long turned a blind eye, prioritizing loyalty over justice. Standing once again on the courthouse steps weeks later, Denise addressed a crowd of supporters, activists, and community members. Her voice was steady, filled with conviction and hope. "This is not just my victory," she declared. "It is a victory for every person who has been ignored, abused, or silenced. Together, we must continue this fight until justice is real and unyielding." The applause that followed was thunderous, but it was the knowledge that change had begun that truly filled Denise's heart. The pain endured, the battles fought, and the courage shown had transformed her from a victim into a catalyst for a more just future. Her story became a rallying cry, inspiring others to stand and speak out. Denise embraced her role as an advocate, knowing that this was only the first chapter in a long journey toward equality and accountability. The day of the advocacy group's launch arrived, carrying a profound sense of hope and purpose. Denise Williams sat in her wheelchair at the center of a bustling community hall filled with supporters, activists, families, and media. The walls were adorned with banners proclaiming dignity, justice, and respect for disabled individuals. Messages that had once felt distant and unattainable, but now blazed with the promise of change. Vanessa Brooks stood proudly beside Denise, her presence a symbol of unwavering support and legal advocacy. Rachel Pierce, the young filmmaker whose camera had captured the defining moments of Denise's journey, held her place nearby, her eyes bright with a shared sense of accomplishment. Denise wheeled herself to the podium, the murmurs of the crowd fading into silence. Her heart pounded with a mixture of nerves and determination. She inhaled deeply, gathering the strength that had carried her through years of pain and struggle. "Today," Denise began, her voice steady and clear, "we stand together, not just to celebrate a victory, but to commit ourselves to a future where no one is ever silenced or marginalized because of their disability." Her words rippled through the room, touching every listener. She spoke of dignity, the right of every individual to be seen, heard, and respected. She recounted her own journey, the nights filled with fear, the courtroom battles, the moments when hope felt impossible, but most importantly, she spoke of resilience and collective power. "This advocacy group," she continued, "is for everyone who has faced injustice, for every voice that has been ignored, and for every person who dreams of a world where justice is blind and fair." The crowd responded with heartfelt applause and cheers. Vanessa stepped forward to outline the legal and community support services the group would provide: access to attorneys, mental health resources, education on rights, and platforms for survivors to share their stories. Rachel announced plans for documentaries and awareness campaigns to amplify voices too often drowned out. Denise's eyes scanned the crowd, meeting faces full of hope and solidarity. The energy was electric, a powerful reminder that from pain could grow purpose, and from struggle could rise a movement. As the event concluded, people approached Denise with gratitude and determination. Stories poured forth, tales of discrimination, courage, and the unyielding desire for change. Denise listened, her heart swelling with both humility and resolve. This was only the beginning. After the launch event, Denise returned to the quiet sanctuary of her home. The door closed behind her with a soft click, shutting out the cheers, the cameras, and the buzz of the outside world. For the first time in many months, she was alone with her thoughts, the silence both comforting and heavy. She settled into her favorite chair by the window, gazing out at the slow movement of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. The soft light of late afternoon cast long shadows across the room, wrapping her in a peaceful embrace that contrasted sharply with the storm of emotions inside. Her mind drifted back through the dark chapters of her journey, the sharp sting of humiliation, the raw ache of pain inflicted by a man sworn to protect. She saw herself once again, trapped in that van, pleading to be understood, only to be dragged out violently, her prosthetic leg clattering against the pavement like a harsh metallic cry. But alongside those vivid memories, other images surface: warm smiles of friends and family, Vanessa's reassuring presence through every court date, Rachel's determined voice narrating her story with unwavering truth, the strength of her community, the rising wave of support, the faces of strangers transformed into allies. Denise realized that her story was no longer just her own. It had become a beacon for others who had suffered in silence. The pain was still there, etched deep into her flesh and spirit, but it had evolved into something powerful. It was no longer just suffering. Tears welled quietly in her eyes as she reflected on how far she had come. The woman who once felt broken and isolated now sat surrounded by love and purpose. The scars on her arms and the ache in her joints were reminders not of weakness, but of a battle bravely fought and survived. She thought about the days ahead, the work still to be done, the challenges she would face as an advocate, and the countless others counting on voices like hers. Healing wasn't a destination but a continuous journey, and every step forward was a triumph. Denise closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the tension melt away, replaced by a calm determination. Her fight had transformed her, and now she had the chance to transform others' lives. The pain and trauma would not be forgotten, but they would no longer define her. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the room in soft twilight, Denise found herself filled with a quiet peace. A new chapter was beginning, one marked by purpose, healing, and the unyielding spirit of a woman who refused to be silenced. Denise looked directly into the camera, her gaze steady and resolute, carrying the weight of a journey marked by pain, courage, and transformation. Her voice was calm yet passionate, a beacon of hope to those watching. To everyone listening right now, I want you to hear me clearly. Your voice matters. You might feel small or powerless in the face of injustice, but your story, your courage, can spark change. You don't have to be a hero, just be brave enough to speak your truth. She paused, letting the silence underscore the power of her words. I know how hard it can be. I've been there, feeling afraid, overwhelmed, and alone. But standing up, even when it feels impossible, is the first step toward breaking the cycle of silence that allows injustice to continue. Denise's eyes softened, reflecting empathy and understanding. Whether it's you, a friend, a family member, or someone you don't even know, every voice raised against cruelty and discrimination chips away at the walls that protect those who abuse power. Together, our voices are louder than any system designed to silence us. She shifted slightly, her tone growing stronger. I am here today because I chose to fight, not just for myself, but for everyone who has been ignored, dismissed, or mistreated because of who they are or what challenges they face. The fight for justice is not easy. It demands courage, resilience, and sometimes sacrifice. But it is worth every step. Denise's face lit with a determined smile. This channel is more than a place to hear stories. It's a community, a space where we stand together, where your story can inspire others, and where our collective strength becomes a force for real change. She leaned in, her voice lowering into a heartfelt plea. If this story moved you, if it awakened a spark inside you, please don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, share it with your friends, your family, your community. Subscribe to this channel and join us in building a movement that refuses to let injustice go unchallenged. Denise's eyes glistened as she continued. Every share, every comment, every act of support pushes the conversation forward. It gives courage to those still trapped in silence. It holds those in power accountable, and it reminds us all that change begins with a single voice willing to say, enough. Her voice softened with gratitude. Thank you for being part of this journey, for opening your heart to stories like mine, and for standing up for a world where dignity and justice are not privileges, but rights we all share. Denise's smile deepened, a quiet strength shining through the years of struggle. Together, we are more than victims or survivors. We are warriors. We are change makers. And together, we will build a future where everyone is seen, heard, and respected. The screen slowly faded to black, leaving behind the echo of her message, a call to courage, solidarity, and unwavering hope for a new beginning.